You know that saying, listening too much to others can drive you insane? Yeah. Sometimes the problem isn't listening, it's what you discover when people finally decide to speak. Today, you're going to hear the story of a psychologist who worked night shifts, handling emotional emergencies. No spirits, no voices, no curses. But there's something far more disturbing than that. The weight of listening to the darkest side of those who are still alive. And if you also have a real story no one would believe, send it to us. In the end, the strange doesn't always come from the supernatural. Sometimes it comes at 3 in the morning and charges by the hour. My name is Renato. I'm 42 years old and I'm a clinical psychologist. For 5 years, I worked at an emergency psychological service in São Paulo, the kind that runs 24 hours a day, receiving everything from panic attacks to people on the verge of a fatal decision. My shift was the one everyone avoided, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The silence of the night made every breath from a patient sound like a whisper inside my head. And that particular night, the phone rang. On the other end, a man, calm voice, too calm. He said his name was Julio. He asked for an in-person appointment, said he needed to talk in private. The protocol was clear. Only see emergency cases under supervision. But he mentioned one word that made me agree. He said, "I think I've done something bad." He arrived at 3:05 a.m., dress shirt, no tie, steady gaze, no sign of agitation. I sat across from him and started as usual. "Do you want to tell me what happened, Julio?" He took a deep breath, looked down, and said something that froze me. "I think someone followed me here." He was sitting right in front of me. The lights in my office were dim at that hour. Indirect light, calm atmosphere, sturdy armchair. Everything designed to make people feel safe. But that night, it felt like I was the patient. "Someone followed me here," he repeated, eyes still fixed on the floor. His voice didn't tremble. It was methodical, almost professional. I asked him to explain, and he continued, "I saw the person's reflection in a parked car at the corner. They stopped when I stopped. Could have been a coincidence," I replied. He looked up and cut me off with one sentence. "I know when I'm being watched." That calmness was what scared me the most. People crying, screaming, breaking down. I could handle that. But someone who speaks like that, with surgical precision, always hides something unsaid. I asked him what brought him there, and he just smiled, not mockingly, but with relief, as if he was finally unburdening himself. "I had to come here," he said, "because I couldn't stand looking at your window anymore." For a moment I thought I misheard. But he repeated, "Your window, doctor. The one on the 8th floor, with the blue curtain." The silence that followed was suffocating. That description was far too specific. No one knew I lived 4 blocks away and my office was just 1 block from my apartment. I tried to stay composed, neutrality and focus on listening, as the protocol said. But my body betrayed me, muscles tense, cold sweat, shallow breathing. "Julio, are you saying you saw me at home?" I asked flatly. He nodded slowly. "I didn't know it was you until today." That sentence echoed inside me. He started telling me he'd been watching the window for months. He said he drove by every night at the same time and always saw someone awake. A man alone, reading, holding a mug. He described details only someone who had really seen it could know. The plant near the window, the crooked lamp, the shelf with blue-spined books. And then came the final blow. One day, the curtain was opened too wide and I saw you crying. That's when I decided to come. I don't remember what I answered. From that point on, I just tried to keep calm, running on professional autopilot. But he kept talking, as if confessing something he hadn't yet said. "You don't know me, but I've been following you for a while. See, I work in private surveillance. I install cameras, trackers, that kind of thing." He paused, looked straight at me. "But this time, I wasn't paid to follow you." For a second, the sounds of the city outside disappeared. No distant traffic, no clock ticking, only the pounding rhythm of my own heartbeat. I didn't know if it was a threat, a delusion, or a confession, but something inside me, maybe the same instinct he claimed to have, knew this wasn't a regular patient session. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and whispered, "You think you're helping people, But you don't notice when someone chooses you. The pen slipped from my hand. Giulio stood up, adjusted his shirt, and said with unsettling calm, "It was nice talking. See you around." Then he left, without looking back. I sat there for minutes, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. It could have been psychosis, performance, or just a man trying to project fear. But the detail that destroyed me came the next day. When I got home, the same building with the blue curtain, I noticed something on the window glass. A small, circular mark, subtle, sticky, as if something had been attached there, and later removed, something small, like a lens. The next morning, I went to work as if nothing had happened, or at least I tried. My head throbbed, the coffee tasted weak, and the sound of the subway was a blur of metal and voices. But inside, I could only think of one thing, that mark on the glass. I'd spent years treating people in crisis, diagnosing paranoia, analyzing delusions. And now, all I wanted was for what I was feeling to be exactly that, just a simple case of paranoia. At 9 a.m., I arrived at the office. Went straight to reception and asked the secretary, "Can you check if a patient named Giulio called again?" She looked through the notes and shook her head. Nothing. No. Recurred. No such name. I opened the clinic's internal system. Everything was digitalized, and every appointment, even emergency ones, had to have a minimum record. Name, time, reason for the session. But the call from 2:37 a.m. simply didn't exist. The phone log, which registered all incoming calls, showed only a line error at that exact time. I stared at the screen for a while, the cursor blinking, the sound of cars outside dissolving my thoughts. Then his words came back to me. "I work with private surveillance. I wasn't paid to follow you." I spent the whole day revisiting old conversations with patients, trying to find some pattern, some name, some coincidence, nothing. But in the late afternoon, as I left the building, something made me stop in the middle of the sidewalk. A black car, an older model, parked in the same exact spot as always. The same one Giulio mentioned when he said he saw my reflection in the glass. Dusty license plate, nothing unusual. But what unsettled me was the small red light blinking on the dashboard. I mentally photographed that car, the location, the time. The next day, I came in early. Around 7 p.m., the car was still there. At midnight when I left, it was in the same spot, but empty. Only the steady, rhythmic flash of the red light remained. My breathing grew shallow, my body reacting before my mind could reason. But a part of me, the rational part, insisted, don't jump to conclusions, observe first. I walked home through the busiest streets I could find, and for the first time in months, I closed every single curtain. That Saturday, I did something I never thought I would. I contacted a former patient. A man in his 30s, an ex-private investigator I had treated years ago after he left the civil police. I called him, explained the basics, that I thought someone was watching me and wanted to confirm whether it was just in my head. He agreed to meet. We met at a corner cafe near Avenida São Luís. He listened, quietly, then jotted down the car model and street on a napkin. All he said was, "Give me 2 days. 2 days that felt like an eternity." On Monday, he called. His voice was dry, direct. "Doctor, that car belongs to a security company that used to operate downtown, but it shut down 2 years ago. And the owner?" I asked. I had to dig deep to find this, but his name appears in a police report. He paused. "Giulio Amaro, the guy who came to see you." My stomach twisted. I asked what the report was about. He took a breath and answered, "Illegal surveillance and invasion of privacy. 2017. He used to install micro cameras in clients' apartments without authorization. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence." The call went silent for a few seconds. Then he added, "Doctor, if you want, I can help you check your place." That night, while he searched every room, every socket, every power outlet, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. How many times during a session had I felt someone watching me and brushed it off as anxiety or irrational fear? When he finished, he called me to the window. "Found something." Behind the curtain, attached to the metal frame, was a tiny black dot, no bigger than a pea. He pulled it out with pliers and showed me a micro camera with its own battery, hidden between the glass and the frame. "It's been here for months, maybe years," he said. And the most disturbing part, the lens was pointing inside the apartment. The ex-detective stayed the night with me, sitting in the kitchen, going through the logs of my router, my computer, my phone. At one point he said, "This isn't amateur work, Doc." The camera's signal was routed through an intermediary server. Translation: whoever installed it knew exactly what they were doing. That sentence haunted me the rest of the night. I started mentally reviewing the past few months. Who had entered my apartment? Who had access to my keys? Who could possibly have the time and skill to hide something so small? The answer was simple: no one. I'd been living alone for 4 years. He took the camera from his pocket and set it on the table between us. The object looked harmless, a tiny piece of black plastic with a glass lens the size of a pupil. But what it represented was suffocating. "This is a Chinese model, common on online stores, but expensive when configured for remote access," he said. "And usually only people with technical knowledge or access to commercial buildings use it." I froze. "Access to commercial buildings?" He nodded. "Janitors, maintenance technicians, security guards." That word made my stomach turn. Janitors, I always greeted mine Mr. Clovis, an elderly, kind man, always ready to help with deliveries, or call the elevator when I came home late. But then I remembered something small, something I had ignored. 2 weeks earlier, he had casually mentioned that a guy from the security company came by to check the hallway cameras. I didn't even question it. The next day, I went to talk to him. With the calmest tone I could manage, I asked, "Mr. Clovis, do you remember the name of the technician who came by the other day?" He scratched his head, thought for a moment, and said, I think it was Julio." The world seemed to spin. I went back to my apartment, closed the door, and that's when it finally hit me. He hadn't come back to ask for help. He never left. Over the next week, I avoided the apartment as much as possible. I spent nights sleeping in my office in small hotels, anywhere without the sound of the intercom or the reflection of glass watching me. But the ex-detective insisted I file a police report. We went together to the station, and there, at the investigator's desk, I found out I wasn't the only one. In recent months, there had been at least 8 similar reports in nearby neighborhoods. Middle-class professionals, psychologists, teachers, journalists, all with hidden micro cameras found in their homes. The investigation pointed to a scheme selling videos through the dark web, a network where footage of private homes and offices was marketed as intimate, access to the lives of ordinary people. The videos had no explicit sexual content. But what the buyers wanted was more than that, the feeling of invading real lives. I never found out if the footage from my apartment was ever sold. But the investigator confirmed one thing. Among the names mentioned in old complaints, Julio Amaral was there, and the last record about him dated back 2 years missing. That day, as I left the station, something inside me shifted. Fear turned into a kind of reverse vigilance. I started noticing details I used to ignore. The elevator camera, the angle of mirrors in the hallways, people walking too slowly past the building. Life went on, but with a new weight, the awareness that no one is ever truly alone. For a while, I thought about changing professions, but then I realized maybe I should do the opposite. I began studying criminal psychology, digital voyeurism, the psychological impact of forced exposure. I discovered that the most common feeling among victims wasn't anger, it was shame for having been seen. And that's what broke me the most. Because I, who had always taught others how to deal with the gaze of others, had to learn what it meant to be watched without consent. Today, whenever someone asks if I believe in strange things, I always answer the same way. The scariest thing that exists is the human gaze, especially the one hiding behind a lens. It's been almost a year since the incident. I've never taken a patient's call after midnight again. But sometimes when the phone buzzes in the silence of my office, I still feel that same cold shiver from the 2:37 a.m. call. I've learned to install my own cameras now, facing outward. Not out of paranoia, but survival. I never let anyone in without checking credentials again, and I never trust a calm voice saying, "I need to talk," without proof. A few months ago, I received an anonymous email. No subject, no message. Just a link. The antivirus blocked it immediately, but the read receipt showed something that froze me. The sender was using my old Wi-Fi password. The ex-detective said it was common. Hackers, spammers, bots recycling leaked passwords. I didn't click the link. I didn't need to. I deleted the email, shut down the computer, and went out for a walk. The street was empty, the air cold, and for a second I caught my reflection in the glass of a closed shop. I didn't look back. I thought of Giulio, or what he represented. The line between watcher and watched is much thinner than we think. The obsession with control, with knowing what others do, is a silent disease. He just showed it to me sooner. Now, when I listen to my patients, I do it differently. I don't look for old traumas or invisible ghosts. I look for that faint gleam in the eyes, the same one I saw in Giulio, of someone who confuses understanding another with owning them. And when the session ends, before silence returns, I always repeat the sentence that keeps me sane. Seeing someone doesn't give you the right to enter their life. I never heard from Giulio again. But sometimes at night, when the connection flickers, I catch myself staring at the webcam light. And I just pray that this time it's glowing from the right side of the screen. 2 weeks after the email, I decided to move. New office, new neighborhood, new routine. But there's something funny about habit. It follows you. I still start the day the same way. Strong coffee, half-open window, dim light. But now there's a new detail. I keep my phone inside a metal box during sessions. They say the signal can't get through. I just feel safer that way. A colleague came to me recently. He said he got an anonymous call asking about me. The man on the other end spoke politely, professionally, but his questions were far too specific. Does the doctor still take after-hours appointments? Is he still alone at night? My colleague thought it was strange but didn't give it much thought. He only mentioned it because the number had an international prefix, something like +46 from Sweden, maybe. And what froze me was the timestamp of the call. 2:37 a.m. I asked him to forward the record. I analyzed every detail and saw something that made my blood run cold. The contact name saved in the internal call system was Giulio, old session, and I never saved that number. I got in touch with the service provider. They said there was no record of an incoming call at that time. None. But the screenshot was there, the number was there, and someone, somehow, had found me again. Since then, I stopped using the same computer. I deactivated all my old accounts. But every now and then, I still get messages from random numbers with just one word. Session. I never replied. But I know what it means. Someone somewhere is still listening. Maybe they never stopped. The irony? I spent my whole life listening to others. Now I'm the one talking. Without knowing to whom, I started recording my own sessions. Not with patients, with myself. I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to know if the voices, the sounds, the coincidences were real or just the product of a tired mind. I pointed the office's security camera directly at my desk. I'd leave it recording whenever I left, and later I'd watch the footage, looking for any sign that someone had entered unnoticed. For weeks, nothing. Silence. Until a Tuesday. When I opened the file, I noticed something that didn't make sense. The video started normally. Me turning off the lights, locking the door, leaving. But about 8 minutes in, the recording froze for a second. And when it resumed, one of the chairs had been moved, slightly, to the center of the room. The lighting, the shadows, the framing, everything was identical, except that. As if someone had paused the camera, walked in, moved the chair, and restarted the recording in the exact same second. I watched that clip over and over. With every replay, my stomach sank a little deeper. There was no sound of a door, no footsteps, no reflection. That night I couldn't sleep. I tore the office apart, checking cables, false panels, hidden microphones. Nothing. Until I noticed a tiny difference in the wall clock. It was 3 minutes fast. A cheap clock bought at a stationery store. But when I took it off the wall, I saw a small hole on the back, and inside it, a built-in microphone. I sent the object to a digital security technician. 2 days later, he called me. This model isn't sold in Brazil. It was made in Europe, likely used for remote audio capture. Do you want to know where it came from? I said yes. He sent me a report by email. On the electronic invoice, there was a single buyer with name and address. The same address as the company I had, reported months earlier. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst was the recipient field. Dr. Enrique Moura, internal technical shipment. In other words, the purchase had been made in my name. Someone had used my information to send the listening device directly to me, legally, as if it were an equipment update from my own work. I stared at that document for hours, and I finally understood what they meant by session. They never needed to break into my office. They had been there all along, and maybe they still are. In the end, this story isn't about crime. It's about the price of living in a world that turned the act of watching into a commodity. We live surrounded by cameras, by screens, by people who believe that observing is the same as belonging. But there's a huge difference between seeing someone and watching someone. The psychologist in this story learned that in the cruelest way possible by being exposed. And maybe that's the lesson that remains. Because no one is ever completely safe, but there is a way to stay sane, and it starts with awareness. It's not paranoia to lock your doors, cover your webcam, or question who enters your home. It's instinct. And instinct, when ignored, is the first thing to go silent. We grow up believing danger lives far away, in dark streets, alleys, scary stories. But in truth, the modern danger is overconfidence. Confidence in saved passwords, in systems, and people who just want to help. So if there's one thing this story teaches, it's this. Pay attention to the details. Danger rarely screams. It watches, waits, and records in silence. And if one day you notice something too small to be coincidence, don't ignore it. Sometimes it's the only warning you'll get. In the end, the real horror isn't being watched. It's pretending it's not happening. See you in the next story.